Welcome to the session on the Enhanced Communication on Progress Questionnaire, Introduction to the Anti-Corruption section. Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Bernard Frey and I'm Senior Manager on Sustainability Reporting at the UN Global Compact. Today we are also joined by representatives of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which is UN Global Compact's key partner for our work on anti-corruption. Before we start, some general housekeeping for today's session. Please direct all questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please take a second to locate the Q&A feature right now. Questions that will not be answered today will be answered in writing in a follow-up to this session. The session will also be recorded and made available on demand on the Academy platform of the UN Global Compact. Live transcription is also available in English by clicking on the live transcript icon. Translation for the session is available into Spanish by clicking the globe icon on the bottom of the screen. Hay traducción al español haciendo clic en el símbolo del globo abajo en su pantalla. Our aim for today is to address 4 key objectives. Review the overall structure and content of the Enhanced Communication on Progress Questionnaire. Set the stage and hear from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, about the relevance for UN Global Compact participants to act and disclose on anti-corruption. Provide context and information on the questions in the anti-corruption section of the questionnaire, and answer questions that you may have. Please note that the introductory part of today's session on the overall structure of the questionnaire has also been introduced in similar sessions we organized earlier this month. If you attended those sessions, please bear with us a few minutes before we deep dive into the anti-corruption section. Please let me start by emphasizing that the Enhanced Communication on Progress has been designed to provide additional value to participating companies and their stakeholders. In particular, the Enhanced Communication on Progress will help participating companies build credibility and brand value, measure and demonstrate progress on the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact and the SDGs, receive insights and learn to improve their performance and drive impact on the 10 principles, and create some comparison points against peers. Let us have a look at the overall structure of the questionnaire. The question of the Communication on Progress is organized in 5 sections: governance, human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. The governance section provides a cross-cutting overview of the company's sustainability governance structure and the processes, while the remaining 4 sections go into greater detail on topics connected to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. Within each section of the questionnaire, the questions are grouped in different categories as they typically address the processes and policies that demonstrate a company's commitment to advance sustainability topics connected to the 10 principles, the efforts taken to prevent negative social and environmental impacts on those topics, performance indicators, and response, remediation, and reporting mechanisms to address grievances and reflect on lessons learned. These categories, commitment, prevention, performance, and remediation, are drawn from and aligned with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which are a useful framework to overall drive and disclose on corporate sustainability. The questions addressing commitment, prevention, performance, and remediation practices and indicators for the areas connected to our 10 principles will help provide a holistic view of your company's sustainability efforts. They will also help you identify gaps and set goals. Questions in the governance section of the questionnaire refer to governance processes and structures that also help companies address anti-corruption. The governance section addresses cross-cutting aspects on commitment, prevention, and remediation connected to all areas of the 10 principles, including on anti-corruption. For instance, questions if the company has a code of conduct, if it has a formal structure to address anti-corruption issues, or if it has processes in place through which the workforce can raise concerns about the company's conduct on anti-corruption, are part of the governance section. All these questions are relevant to human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Let us see one question of the governance section as an example. Question 6 of the governance section asks if the company has risk assessment processes in place. As most questions in the governance section do, this question addresses the 4 areas connected to the 10 principles, including anti-corruption. In this case, risk assessment processes is an important aspect to an organization's strategy and helps identify possible integrity risks and can help prevent corruption. We will not cover the questions in the governance section today, but for more information, you can consult our guidebook and also access the recording of our session on the governance section of the questionnaire in the UN Global Compact Academy platform. If we can go to the next slide, thank you. Today, we will go into the details of the anti-corruption section of the Communication on Progress questionnaire. We are pleased to have with us Giovanni Gallo, who is the Chief of the Implementation Support Section of the Corruption and Economic Crime Branch at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. We will hear about the relevance for business of disclosing on the Communication on Progress to help advance the UN anti-corruption agenda and Principle 10 of the UN Global Compact. Simon Gewölb, who is Associate Expert at the Implementation Support Section of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, will then walk us through the questions of the anti-corruption section. Our colleague, Ashley Ann Deming, who is Manager on Anti-Corruption at the UN Global Compact, will also support the deep dive into the anti-corruption section. With that, I would now like to give the floor to Giovanni Gallo. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Over to you, Giovanni.
Bernard, thank you very much, and my warm welcome to all of you participating today in this webinar. Warm welcome from Vienna, from Giovanni Gallo and Simon, who will join us in a few moments, from UNODC, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, one of the many acronyms that you may find across the UN universe. So allow me to spend a moment to frame the UN Office on Drugs and Crime in the broader constellation of the United Nations. If you look at the UN as if it was a government, the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, would certainly be the Prime Minister, and the UN would be divided in a number of ministries. Health would be WHO, human rights, of course, you would know which one it is, and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime would be equivalent to the Ministry for Sinister Affairs, if that ever existed. So it's the part of the UN responsible for supporting member states in their efforts to prevent and fight illicit drugs, organized crime, terrorism, and of course, corruption. Last year alone, in the context of our anti-corruption work, we were present in 120 countries around the world, delivering over 50 global level activities, 28 regional programs, 108 country programs. Let's come to immediately the instrument that you see on this slide, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which was adopted by the General Assembly in the year 2000. It came into force in the year 2003. Now, we need to reset back the clock by 20 years, 22 indeed, when this convention was adopted, at the time when there were still several economic theories according to which corruption, after all, was not that bad. Corrupt money somehow recycles into the economy. It's money that remains. It's money which is necessary to facilitate interaction between the private and the public world. All those notions were erased by the adoption by the 193 member states of a treaty, the multilateral treaty, the UN Convention Against Corruption, that clearly defines corruption as a crime. Not as an administrative violation or a civil violation, as a criminal violation. Now, in the space of less than 20 years, this convention has been ratified by 189 governments around the world. So 4 to go before we achieve universal ratification. Now, you may wonder, why is all this important for the private sector? This is an issue for governments. Well, it is important for a number of reasons. First of all, in this text, in these 71 articles of the UN Convention Against Corruption, you would find the private sector called out by name more than 40 times. You would realize that when the world agrees on a standard state-of-the-art set of rules, such as those contained in this treaty, that is the best way to achieve the legendary level playing field. Because of the legal obligation to implement this treaty by the governments who have ratified it, you will no longer have a country where facilitation payments are allowed and tax deductible, and a country where they're not. You will no longer have a country where individuals are held liable for their offenses of corruption, but the companies on whose behalf they operate are not. You will no longer have a country where banks can tell prosecutors, well, I will not reveal the identity of my customer because of bank secrecy laws. So all these things which governments have committed to are the best recipe to the level playing field, which allows business to operate in the same environment and in a fair and competitive way. Now, a treaty adopted in the year 2000 came into force in 2003. How does that relate to principle number 10 of the Global Compact? Well, the first 9 principles of the Global Compact were adopted exactly in the year 2000 on the occasion of the adoption of the Millennium Development Goals. But then when in 2003, the public sector came up with its own set of rules against corruption, well, the private sector felt the need to respond, and very much credit to it, by adding to the catalog of 9 principles of the Global Compact, the 10th. It comes up 4 years after the others. And it's the principle that tells us that business should work against corruption in all its forms, including extortion and bribery. But this principle does not tell us how this should be done. This is why the UN Convention Against Corruption became the underlying legal instrument for the 10th principle, and UNODC, of course, was given the role of being the guardian entity of it. And let's come closer to the topic of today's seminar, or webinar indeed. Of course, there is an enormous difference between a legally binding treaty for governments and the voluntary initiative, a voluntary corporate social responsibility initiative, the largest in the world, such as the Global Compact. But let's be clear about what is voluntary there. I can choose to play a football game or not to play a football game. That's voluntary. But once I choose to play the game, compliance with the rules of that game is no longer a matter of choice. You can, of course, choose to join the Global Compact or not. But once you make that choice, well, then there are certain rules, one of which is reporting on your commitments. And that brings us exactly to the topic of today's webinar. The system for reporting on your Global Compact commitments has been there since the establishment of the Global Compact. And today, we are bringing it one step forward. Today, there will be an introduction of how companies can report in a more accurate, in a more systemic way on their anti-corruption commitments in particular. And again, you may wonder, but what is the other part of the equation doing? It's doing exactly the same. Governments that have ratified the UN Convention Against Corruption are obliged to report on their implementation efforts through a peer review system, to a reporting mechanism, which in its essence, not in its mechanism itself, is not that different from the communication on progress here of the Global Compact. I will not go any further, if not to say that in addition, of course, to working hand in hand with our partners from the Global Compact on the reporting exercise, we also conduct specific activities on the ground for the private sector, mainly of learning nature, training courses, manuals, learning products on how to make sure that companies, including SMEs, are equipped to prevent and deal with corruption when it happens. Bernard, thank you very much to you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Giovanni, for your remarks and also UNODC's support throughout the process. With that, I'm pleased to give the floor to Simon, who will walk us together with Ashley through the questions of the anti-corruption section. Thank you.
Bernhard, thank you, Giovanni. I hope you can also hear me. A warm welcome to all of you joining us today here in this important webinar on the communication on progress and the chapter on anti-corruption. My name is Simon Gewölb. I'm an associate expert at UNODC, working here in the areas of anti-corruption and integrity in the private sector. I've spent, I think, this past almost 2 years working closely with my colleagues that are also here on the call, working on and in the effort to redesign an updated version of the COP. And it's really exciting to be here with you today and to roll it out to, well, the pioneering companies that you are here in the call. So what I will do in the next 15 to 20 minutes is walk you through the different and new questions of the anti-corruption section that are part of the new COP. And before starting, I would just quickly like to also make the connection to what Bernhard just shared about the different sessions that were already conducted and the different sections of the COP, in particular the governance section. The recording is still available for you should you like to review it. It could be of interest because some of the provisions that you saw in the governance section are also very relevant to the anti-corruption section, and it would be important to see both sections as a whole. As you know from the previous sections, and it was mentioned before, the anti-corruption section is also composed of 4 categories in which we have 8 questions that cover the different most important topics. The 4 categories are commitment, prevention, performance, and response, remediation, and reporting. So we can go to the next slide and start with the first question that falls into the category commitment. If we can, and then the next slide, please. Thank you so much. This question basically asks whether your company has an anti-corruption compliance program in place. So an anti-corruption compliance program is, if you want, a system of processes, policies, procedures, and controls developed to address the risks of corruption and of unethical behavior in organizations. And of course, there are many aspects and variations to an anti-corruption compliance program that could be in there that would have to be considered. And so every compliance program will likely look different depending on the characteristics of your company. To give you some examples, an anti-corruption compliance program could include and respond to answers to questions such as risk assessment, how are corruption risks assessed, how often, and conducted by whom. They could also treat the topic of external communication. Are anti-corruption commitments systematically communicated to business partners? They could also talk about the role of senior management, for example, answer questions like how and when is senior management and the company board included in the company's efforts to provide and fight corruption. It could talk about sanctions, it could talk about oversight and ownership, and many other topics that I can't mention here. But I think the idea is clear. The anti-corruption program, compliance program, is a core tool in a way for a company to respond to anti-corruption and integrity risks. And so it is no coincidence that this question is also at the beginning of the section on anti-corruption, because it's really the foundation for all other questions. And I would say if your company has a well-developed and established anti-corruption program in place, then also all the following questions that we have in this section should be rather straightforward and easy to answer. Like with all the other questions in the COP, and Bernhard mentioned it also, you can use a variety of resources to get more information and clarity should you need that. There's a glossary available for the COP, which clearly defines key terms used throughout the standard. There are also publications that, for example, we have developed at UNODC that, if we look at an anti-corruption compliance program, that describe in detail the different elements that would be needed by such a program and also how to develop one. At the end of the presentation, there's a slide with resources you can use, and you also find the guide on anti-corruption compliance programs there. So there are a lot of resources that we can also offer to support you. I would also, in this connection, like to highlight another point, which I think is also very relevant, which is that this question, anti-corruption question 1, but also the others, and I think throughout the COP, the idea was to not reinvent, the wheel completely, but to also look at other reporting standards and to design questions in a way that, they are similar and that data that is already there can be used again. So for example, you see here on the slides, and more information is also in the other documents you will receive, reference to the GRI standard. So wherever possible, we try to make this connection to also make it easier for you. So back to the question that we were looking at, does the company have an anti-corruption compliance program? You have 3 responses to choose from. Response 1, no, it's not an immediate business priority. 2, no, but we plan to in the next 2 years. And then response 3 would be yes, if you have one. If you respond with yes, then a follow-up question will appear, which you do not see on the slide now, but it would appear in the COP. That would then ask you when the program was last reviewed. Of course, this information is important. The company, one company A, could have a compliance program that was established in 1950 and not reviewed and updated since then. And of course, this information would then indicate a very different level of, updating or maybe even of importance given to a topic than another organization that every other years or so updates and reviews the anti-corruption compliance program. So the follow-up question is just to ask you when it was last reviewed, and you would then respond to the question. There was one question, I think, that what we discussed before that I had received. It was on the question on the word review. So when the anti-corruption compliance program was last reviewed, of course here we really do not specify any specific type of review or any legal type of review. The question is really, when was the last time that there was an effort made to kind of look at the existing anti-corruption compliance program and to see how it fits to the current needs and whether there's a need to update it or not. Okay, this is enough words, I think, for the first question. If we can go to the next slide, please, and go to question 2 out of 8 in this section. So question 2 could already have been covered by the first question, but given its importance, I think for literally everyone that is in the working environment, I would dare say it was important to also include it specifically in the COP. The question is, does your company have policies and recommendations for employees on how to act in case of doubt and or in situations that may represent a conflict of interest? For example, with regard to gifts and hospitality, donations, sponsorship, or interactions with public officials. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the situation that this question aims to target. Of course, it could be argued now that giving gifts or providing hospitality are legitimate expenditures and or common business practices for building relationships or to express appreciation. But of course, the risk is with these items that I just mentioned, and these actions, that not so much the expenditure itself, but the situational factors and the disproportionality that might be involved. So an extreme case, of course, inviting a public official with whom a public tender is currently being negotiated to, I don't know, an all-inclusive expensive weekend, that clearly would have to raise a lot of suspicion and red flags, and in the end, it might very well constitute a legal offense as well. So this would be an extreme situation, but there are many situations like this, and sometimes even less kind of clear situations that we all still face. And companies are advised to assess the risks that are particular to the own organization, arising from the specific nature of business operations, employment structures, industries, and so on, and then identify these difficult situations that pose integrity risks and develop respective policies and guidelines to orient employees and to really help them understand what the issue is and how to deal with it. For example, when I look at my own organization, and here now I'm referring to the UN Secretariat, I can share with you that we have a clear policy regarding the receipt of gift, right? That's a situation that also can very likely occur to us here in our professional lives. And there's a clear guidance that in general, we're not allowed to receive gifts arising from official positions or performance of UN duties. And we always regularly reminded of that, but in particular, we always receive every, I think, December or so, a pre-Christmas, cordial message reminding us of this fact. Of course, it's very important, the gifts in the Christmas season. Yeah, this is, of course, a meaningful policy, and there's a clear orientation. But what is even more important, and I would like to highlight that here, is that there are also guidelines of what we should do as employees when, for whatever reason, we could not avoid the situation of receiving a gift, when it would cause, embarrassment to the organization, or so on. And then there are clear steps, and colleagues and institutions that would need to be informed to deal with this. And so this way, it's not just a policy, saying good or bad, but it also really kind of takes into account the environment and the realities that we have to face often, and then it provides concrete guidance on what to do. And this is basically what question 2 asks to know. And you have different answer options there, that you don't have such a policy in your company, that you plan to establish one in 2 years, that it is included within a broader policy, for example, of course, the Anti-Corruption Compliance Program, or that you have something like that as a standalone policy. Good. This is the second question. If we can go to the next slide, please. Right. So the next subchapter that we are going into now is the subchapter of prevention. And here we have 2 questions for you. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is anti-corruption question 3, and it covers certainly one of the key aspects of the prevention of corruption, and that is also an area where we, as the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, but also of course the colleagues from the Global Compact, can provide a lot of resources and support, training and education. Training can be a tremendously effective tool to help prevent incidents of corruption and to identify misconduct within organizations. And training can also be an effective tool to implement anti-corruption measures among business partners and within supply chains, and potentially even beyond in the business environment. So depending on your company, your industry, the region you work in, and all the other characteristics that make your organization so specific, a training needs to be tailored accordingly. And then it can include a variety of different topics. A training might want to, for example, teach employees about the main aspects of anti-corruption, of the anti-corruption compliance program you have in place, or you might have a training that focuses on conflict of interest and disclosure requirements, potentially targeted at very senior employees of your organization. Potentially you run a training that basically just explains to all stakeholders, maybe even business partners, on how harmful corruption is and how, at least in the middle and long run, it creates very negative effects on the company and on the own business. And there are many other trainings on reporting channels and so on that you might want to consider. And all these different aspects fall under what we call here training on anti-corruption and integrity. If you say yes, this training is provided, then we want to know also a bit more to whom you're providing this type of training. We've listed a couple of different stakeholders: employees, select employees, all employees, contractors, direct suppliers of the organization, indirect suppliers, and then others such as partners and clients. And if you respond positively to any of these questions, then a follow-up question would appear that, again, you don't see here, but you will see in the COP, which basically asks you how often such training is provided. Is it only provided, once upon recruitment, for example? Is it provided every year, and so on? So this is the type of information that we seek here from you on the topic of training and education. Good. If we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide is the slide on the anti-corruption question 4. also part of the prevention theme question. And here it asks whether your company monitors the anti-corruption compliance program and its effectiveness, and then potentially even connects back the findings into improvements of the anti-corruption program. Of course, this question is related also to the first question, where we asked you whether the company has an anti-corruption compliance program in place. And now it wants to know kind of if there is a structured process to assess how effective this is. Because obviously, in the end, the objective we have is not to have a policy in place or an anti-corruption compliance program, but to achieve the goals and impacts that are behind it. So in this case, the objectives on anti-corruption and compliance. So it's crucial really to assess whether the anti-corruption compliance program fulfills this goal, whether policies are implemented optimally, resources used well, and whether they are actually effective. And this is so true because there's unfortunately no blueprint solution for a compliance program, right, that would work for all companies. There are good practices, and I mentioned that we can provide support in that, and there are publications that we have published and the colleagues from the Global Compact on how to design a compliance program. But in the end, it has to be tailored to your company and to its specific characteristics and risks. And that makes it so important to also constantly monitor and evaluate the effectiveness, and to then use the findings, and to feed them back into improvements of the program. So that's a question. Whether the company monitors its anti-corruption program. We have the following options for responses. No, we don't monitor the anti-corruption compliance program, in which case you would be asked to provide additional information, or yes, we review it on an ad hoc basis, or through internal employee self-evaluations, or through automated controls monitoring, with that being an automated process. Could be software-based, could be even include artificial intelligence and other topics, but a process that is automated and that continuously monitors the effectiveness of the program and generates data. But you could also be responding that you use external independent monitoring, or that you use other mechanisms, in which case you would also have the opportunity to provide more input. And I said it before, if you feel like the answers are not don't represent your reality, then you can also use the optional function below to provide additional explanations. So this is on the anti-corruption compliance program. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, the next slide is again a slide showing the different sections. Now we have one question in the performance section that needs to be answered. If we can go to the next slide, please. So, and this is anti-corruption question 5 on incidents of corruption. It asks basically to report the total number and nature of incidents of corruption during the reporting year. And this is, on the one hand, the number of incidents that were confirmed during the current year and that are related to the current year. And on the other hand, incidents confirmed during the current year but related to previous years, right? So this is why you have the two options there. And here again, as I mentioned before, just to flag that this question is also, for example, part of the GRI reporting standards, and you might already have this information available if you report under these standards. Of course, if your organization does not measure this metric, you could select the option unknown, or you could select the option choose to not disclose. Either way, though, your selected option would be made public, obviously, as a response to the COP. And here I thought, I just share a bit from my work also, but I think that it also relates to the work that you do, how essential I believe it is to actually, make great efforts to collect data on the topics that we care about. Because often it is only, that's at least my experience, when we have data and we can put it on a table, and show it to our peers, our supervisors up in the hierarchy and other stakeholders, that then the awareness of a problem or of a challenge, begins to dawn, it begins to be understood by others. And so this to say that data on cases of corruption or suspected cases of corruption even is so important. And of course, it can also serve as a proxy for the effectiveness of a company's overarching anti-corruption program, culture, capabilities. In particular, going across time, it can be extremely insightful to see if there's a development in corruption cases. And it could also be a door opener for a conversation with other partners, other companies that face similar challenges, to develop collective actions to face them together. Now, there are two aspects actually to the question. It is the number of incidents and it is the nature of incidents. So here, just to let you know that once you enter a number into the field, a text box will appear and you have the opportunity to then provide more information on the nature of incidents, right? And here again, it could be a lot of different inputs could be in there. So we didn't provide a list, but of course, from commercial bribery and kickbacks, which is when an employee of one company gives payments or undue advantages or gifts to employees of another company to secure an advantage, over to trading of information, for example, when an employee offers or receives a bribe in exchange for confidential information, or embezzlement or other types of fraud. All this would then be inputted by you under nature of incident. There are many different forms and facets of fraud and of corruption. And however, and this is the last point I think I wanted to make here, when you detect them, or when there's a suspicion for these cases, it should be seen as a good sign. It should be seen as a sign that the anti-corruption compliance program actually works and actually helps to detect the cases. So it's good to report here, in other words. Yes, if you can go to the next slide, please, question 6. So question 6, we see that the last 3 questions are part of the response, remediation and reporting section. And question 6, however, if you can go to the next slide, please, is kind of the obvious follow-up question to question 5. When violations of the company's anti-corruption policy and procedures are suspected or reported, it's crucial to address these violations in order to demonstrate the company's commitment to zero tolerance of corruption, to your policy, etc. And then how your company addresses these violations really establishes the credibility also of the program that you have in place towards employees, towards business partners, other stakeholders, and of course also towards, for example, law enforcement, because that when incidents of corruption happen is an important stakeholder to also consider. So all these measures that you might be taking with regard to suspected or confirmed incidents of corruption, you would then report here. There are different options to choose from. And again, there's also a text box at the bottom where you could provide additional explanation if you like. Here, just to say that in the end, it's also a huge opportunity when there are suspicions, reports, or confirmed cases of corruption to actually really learn and improve and strengthen the anti-corruption compliance program. So again, it's a good moment to collect the data and to examine it and to feed it into the program to make it stronger. If you can go to question 7, we're coming to an end, but there's an important concept that we would like to mention here, collective action. That's a way to tackle, among the most difficult challenges we have relating to business integrity and anti-corruption. We at UNODC implement almost 20 collective action initiatives with companies from all around the world. And so does also the Global Compact. And so my colleague, Ashley, from the UN Global Compact will walk you through the slide.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. So for over a decade, the UN Global Compact has collaborated with various organizations, including the Global Compact local networks, to promote collective action against corruption. And when we say collective action, we follow the World Bank's definition, which is collective action is a collaborative and sustained process of cooperation between stakeholders, increases the impact and credibility of individual action, brings vulnerable individual players into an alliance of like-minded organizations, and levels the playing field between competitors. Collective action can complement or temporarily substitute for and strengthen weak local laws and anti-corruption practices. In essence, it is stakeholders such as business, civil society, and government joining forces to tackle an identified corruption challenge, as we recognize that one business's actions or stakeholders' actions, while critical, are not enough to end corruption. So there are four main types of collective action initiatives: principles-based initiative, integrity pacts, certified business coalition, and anti-corruption declarations. In June, we at the Global Compact launched a playbook on anti-corruption collective action, which is available on our website in English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and soon to be Arabic. And the playbook outlines methodology and provides suggestions on how to develop and carry out an initiative. And I welcome those interested in learning more about collective action to read through our playbook for more information. So right now at the Global Compact, we're implementing 2 global multi-year projects in which 10 of our local networks are implementing collective action initiatives. And this includes Argentina, Bangladesh, Brazil, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Thailand, and Ukraine. So you can see we have quite a bit of initiatives going on through our networks. And there are also ongoing collective action projects led by other local networks such as Korea and Pakistan, and including, as Simon mentioned, our strategic partners such as UNODC. So the purpose of this question is to understand if your company is engaging in one of the existing local network-led initiatives or potentially engaging in one through another organization in your business environment. And if the answer is yes, it would be great to provide a bit more context on the initiative so we can just understand what initiative you're engaging with. And for those who are not engaging, the B20 Collective Action Hub, which is maintained by the Basel Institute on Governance, another strategic partner, offers an open database to find information on existing initiatives around the world. So if there's more questions on collective action, I'm happy to answer those. I'm currently the project manager on both of our global projects, but the intention of this question is to understand, is your company engaging, and if so, how, in what initiative or in what types of actions? So thank you. So I'll turn it back over to Simon.
Yeah, I think because we are now looking at the last slide, question 8, which reads, briefly describe practical actions the company has taken during the reporting period and or plans to take to implement the anti-corruption principle, including any challenges faced and actions taken towards prevention and or remediation. So this is your opportunity to share additional information, especially, you know, since many of the questions in this section, and I believe also in the others, are very intentionally of quantitative kind. We did this for various reasons, but this is a space that then allows you to provide context, additional information, which you couldn't share in the previous questions. You could, for example, share information on recent activities you've done in your company, or you could mention challenges your company has faced, or share good practices that you developed. Before we close, I would just like to mention, and I'm sure this was mentioned before, but there would also be, but that's different to the anti-corruption part, a survey where you can provide feedback, thoughts, and questions in general on the COP. So I think these text boxes are also an opportunity to put in questions, but that to say there's also a dedicated survey where there's space to put in all the questions or feedback that you would have on any of the 8 questions. So this one focuses in particular on what you have done in addition to the first 7 questions. And with this, I believe we're at the end of the anti-corruption section, the end of the questionnaire, I think, as well. And I give it back to you, Bernhard.
Thank you so much, Simon and Ashley, for walking us through the section. And indeed, as a reminder, early adopters, will be required to complete the questionnaire through the period opening in 1st April until 31st May. Early adopters will also be invited to answer a feedback survey, as Simon has mentioned. So you will receive all information, and we have a set of questions for you related to the digital platform and your user experience, as well as to the questionnaire itself, where your feedback and recommendations will be most helpful. That will help us make the needed adjustments prior to the launch of the COP in 2023 for all participating companies. With that, we would like to open it or continue opening up for Q&A. We have received some questions in the chat. I will give it a minute to see if there are additional questions that you would like to raise, and using the opportunity to thank again our speakers. And as Simon also mentioned, we have a list of resources and guidance that can help you both better understand, both better address, and also better disclose on the issues raised in the questionnaire. Your first go-to guidance could be the COP guidebook that we have shared with you. And that guidebook also then contains the link and references to the additional sources. Some of them you can see on the slide here that you can use to better address and disclose. And as we have mentioned also in previous sessions, and Simon has also reminded, most of the questions in the questionnaire are connected to existing reporting standards and frameworks, particularly the GRI. So particularly also questions on calculations, etc. We fully rely on what is out there in the market. So if you're already disclosing on the GRI and others, you will have the information readily available to answer our questionnaire. If not, those frameworks provide additional useful guide and references on how to disclose on the question. I'm gonna give it a few more seconds to see if we have additional questions coming in through the chat. Otherwise, you can write us an email at copearlyadopters@unglobalcompact.org. We will be happy to answer those questions. In the sessions, you will find the recordings on the Academy platform. And on 7 April, we plan to do a next session. That session will provide you with a demo and a walkthrough through the online platform. So you will get first-hand insights on how to log in and walk you through the platform. But the platform will already be open starting 1st April. If there are no more questions coming through the chat, I would then thank again Giovanni, Simon, and Ashley for their input and support throughout the process, and also in this session. We look forward to continuing our collaboration with UNODC. We look forward to continuing advancing action on Principle 10, anti-corruption. And thank you to all attendees today for joining us today, and also for your participation in the Early Adopter Program.
Thank you. Goodbye to all.
Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.